thank you for joining poet Arundhathi Subramaniam and myself on Off the Record. Arundhathi is a Mumbai-based poet. She's visiting Chennai because she, along with the renowned Bharatanatyam artist and Padma Bhushan awardee Alarmel Valli, together they have co-conceptualized a thematic dance recital called Only Until the Light Fades, which is a selection of love poems from then and now in Telugu, Tamil, Sanskrit and English. Only Until the Light Fades is a line from Arundhathi's poem Vigil. Thank you so much for joining us, and the show was premiered at the NCPA in Bombay, and then we at Ndtv Hindu were honoured to present Alarmel Valli here at the Sir Mutta Venkata Subbarao Hall on the 18th of October. The performance of course wouldn't have been complete if Arundhathi was not here, so very, very glad that you could make it.
Thank you, Anu. Feels very good to be here.
And now I'd like to introduce you. As you will find out in the course of this conversation, Arundhathi's poetry is much like herself. It is sophisticated and sensual, it is luminous and lyrical, it is witty and warm, and reading her poetry is like getting under the skin of them and experiencing the very emotion. So it's great to be chatting with you. I thought we could start off by talking about Vigil. And whether you will read the poem for us, so it sort of sets the mood, as it were.
Would you like me to just start by reading it?
Yes, please.
Yeah? Vigil. As shadows lengthen, as the horizon smudges into secrecy, as the ocean withdraws into a misty November opacity, feelings begin to grow more medieval, and I long for you, as other lovers have before me, in a great melodic deluge, awash through history, veined silver with melancholy, deep-throated, brine-flecked with yearning. Twilight is the light for lyric poetry, a stab of blue kingfisher poetry, a small blaze of longing and regret that is almost love. Too slight for immortality, too intense to go unsung. I almost understand now why those women in the poems I've ritually deplored wandered over to their mirrors, tracing against their lips the wine stain of an unforgotten passion, coiling against their necks seething torrents of hair into a muted tempest, still electric with desire. And it feels like I too could wait for you while I perform the erotic liturgies of another world. Wait for you who understands like none other the prosody of my breath. Wait for you, and you alone. But only until the light fades, my love. Only until the light fades.
You know, I just love that little twist in the end, because here you have the Nayika aching, yearning and longing for her beloved, and I think if I were her, I would just wait for him forever. Wouldn't you? So I just love that little contradictory, that little twist.
Well, I guess you know, I think I've told you, Anu, I think the poem happened because of a certain sense of impatience I had felt with the Nayika. So, you know, this eternally pining Nayika was something I felt annoyed with in my growing years when watching dance. And at the same time, I've been fascinated by her. So I guess the poem is really about both those impulses.
But you know, I think this poem, I was telling Baliyaka also, I think it was just waiting to be set to song and waiting to be danced to. And I think you found the right dancer to sort of convey that. Baliyaka says that she just doesn't collaborate with anybody, you know. She's very, very careful about who she works with, because trust is a very important factor for her. So how did you both meet, or how were you introduced to her work?
Well, I've known Valli for a long time, Anu. I think I saw her work. I've been seeing her work ever since I was in my 20s, perhaps earlier, and I've seen her in Bombay perform for several years at the Tata Theatre at the NCPA. So I'm a huge admirer of her work. But I met her probably 15 to 20 years ago, I would imagine. I've interviewed her at length because I used to write on dance at a point in time, write on culture. So we've had interesting conversations, but I think it's been perhaps in the past 5 or 6 years that the conversations have deepened in a certain way. And my admiration, which was always there, has turned to something much more, which is a very deep affection, as well as a tremendous level of comfort and ease. You know, poets are solitary creatures as well. We don't collaborate, and thankfully we don't have to. That's the nature of our work. But with someone like Balli, it's possible to even conceive of it, not just because she's just an outstanding artist, but because of the kind of person she is. And I don't think it would have been possible without that comfort level, you know.
Now, from the point of actually penning the poem to the point of its performance, what has that process been like, the evolution, as it were?
You know, the poem was written a long time ago. It's from my first collection, which happened in 2001, so a long time ago. And it was written well before that. So it's been a somewhat interesting evolution, I think, from page to performance, because when Balli took it over, we knew that it was appropriate for this recital on the one hand, because it is a love poem, and it is a love poem inspired by classical dance. But there were also huge challenges, because it is a poem in English, and then to transform a poem in English to something suited to Bharatanatyam, which is of course a dance form rooted in a very different linguistic context, was one challenge. And then there was the fact that we were moving, this to my mind was a bit blasphemous, we were moving from Kalidasa, immortal Kalidasa, to a very mortal, ordinary, everyday modern voice. So how were we going to deal with that? Of course, thankfully, the challenges were all Balli's. I didn't watch it at all, Anu, so I had no idea what she was doing with it. But I did go for a recording of the poem, at which point I heard Balli read the poem. It was when I heard her read the poem that I knew that she'd made it hers. This was now her poem. You know, I always trusted her ability to deal with poetry and to deal with music. She has a very nuanced understanding of both. But when I heard her read it, I knew that the poem had been effectively handed over. So it's really her poem now.
And what I really liked about that recording, and the music is by Rajkumar Bharati, is Valyaka reads it and you read it too. And what a lovely contrast, because she has this very childlike, very silky voice, and you have a very sensual, strong voice. I thought that was a really beautiful contrast.
Well, it was an impromptu decision, you know. And when I heard her read it, I said, we must have your voice too. So it's a much more tender reading in a way, hers. And to my mind, I'm very glad she did it.
Now, I'd like to read, I don't know if I can read as well as you, but I'd like to read from Demand, which I think is a very tactile, very visual, very atmospheric poem. It gives me goosebumps. I really like it.
Thank you. In fact, I'm glad you chose it because it is a recent love poem. Very different in some ways from Vijay.
Which year did you write this?
This is from my most recent collection, so it's probably been written in the past 3 years.
Oh, you know what? I just realized I haven't introduced you formally. We just got talking about Vijay, so may I do that introduction now? I am so sorry, forgive me, but Arundhathi has published 3 collections of poetry. The first one being On Cleaning Bookshelves. The second one is Where I Live. The third one is Where I Live, New and Selected Poems, published by a Blood Axe in the UK. She has authored a book called The Book of Buddha. She is also the India editor for the Poetry International Web, and she has co-edited an anthology of Indian love poetry in English called Confronting Love. Did I get it all right?
That's absolutely, perhaps more than enough.
So let me read from Demand, which is one of my very favorite love poems. It goes like this. And on days like this, nothing else will do. Nothing but that whisper of breath against the ear. Breath that's warm like the sigh of palmyra trees in Tirunelveli plantations. Breath that's crisp like linen, rice starched, dhoop soaked in a family cupboard. Breath to be trusted, with a thread maybe of something your foremothers never knew or pretended not to. The spice mist of hookah on winter nights in Isfahan, or raw splatter of Himalayan rain, or wine baroque with the sun of Al-Andalus. Breath of outsider, ancestor, friend, who leaves nothing more than this signature of air against skin, reminding you that there's nothing respectable about family linen when cupboard doors close, reminding you that this uncensored wilderness of greed is simply, or not so simply, body.
Thank
You know
you.
what I really like? I like this sentence here, breath to be trusted with the thread maybe of something your foremothers never knew or pretended not to. So there are these little startling bits of truth, you know, in your poetry, which I find very, very, I mean, it just kind of shakes you a little bit out of your complacency.
Thank you, Anu. And it seemed particularly appropriate that you should read that because if I recall correctly, you did a reading of my very first book when I was here in Chennai many years ago.
Yeah, it was so beautiful because I remember Valiyaka attended. So I think this
She
is
did. That's
this
right.
is serendipity that we should
That's
all be
right.
meeting after so many
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Arundhathi, tell me, is poetry much more difficult as a craft? Because just look at that economy, that precision that goes in. It has to sound right, it has to read right. There's just so much that goes into crafting a poem. So tell me, is it difficult? Do you do a lot of rewrites?
I do endless rewrites. I do endless rewrites. I think poetry is about the significance of a very spontaneous and intense moment. That moment is important. But after that, it requires one hell of a lot of drafts and revisions and going back to the work, putting it away, allowing it to gestate, bringing it out again. So yes, it's about a lot of rewriting.
You must tell us about your relationship with Mumbai because it's a city that you have said earlier that you feel very ambivalent towards. But I was wondering if we could do that after a short break.
Sure.
So we have lots more to talk about with poet Arundhathi Subramaniam. Join us on Off the Record.